As you look at your screen there, maybe you might recognize this diagram, and if you've been struggling to get your car running, I have a solution. The problem is this wire here, which goes back to the ECU, triggers this relay, and this is the fuel pump relay. This operates a very low draw of current, so it doesn't really pull much current at all. And when you use a meter to read what's going on, you'll find that you've got like 9.5 volts there pretty much constantly with the battery connected, whether the ignition is on or off. And when you do switch the ignition, you get 12 volts, and when the car is running, you get 14.4. And you won't wonder why this relay isn't running. So I have the relay out here. This is the one in question. So this is number 409, and you can see it's got a bunch of connections here. And if you chase back the wires through the diagrams here, so this goes to current track 20. So just in case, this is, let's say for example, these guys here are 175, 176. So if you go back to your diagram and if you look for 20 there, you'll find that this guy here is live with the ignition switched. Some of these go to the airbag unit, and this one here, this one's for automatic only, and this one goes to the door open. So when you open the door, it does something to this relay. So you've also got this connection up here, which is related to the X relay. That's when you crank the engine. Some services in the car are dropped. I'm not sure if this is in all cars or not, but anyhow, I won't get into that. So this guy here anyway is the one that does the driving. So what I found was, no matter what way I connected this guy up, so I did all the pinning, did all the metering, it just won't work for me. So what I'm figuring is it's got something to do with the airbag control. So it's got something to do with this guy here. Now I guess you could go messing and shoving 12 volts into it, or shoving ground into it, and maybe blow this ECU up. So I don't want to go there. And I've tried messing just with a regular battery, and this will not switch for me. So I then turn myself to these guys here, which is just like a regular relay. This is the 100, so he needs a bit of juice to switch. So I also use a standard run-of-the-mill one, and it would not switch either. And what I mean not switch is the ECU here would not switch the fuel pump relay on. But I'll show you now what I've come up with, and it'll fix it. So what I have here inside in the car is, this is a PCB relay. It's capable of switching 10 amps. And I've got the purple wire here, which goes back to the ECU, and this red wire here is a positive coming from the car. I've got my meter set up here looking for continuity, and I've got the pins. This relay here is a normally open, normally closed relay, so it's either normally open or normally closed. So, and it's got 2 lots of the pins, but it could be anyone really. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to switch on my ignition, and what you'll notice is, you hear my fuel pump running now, but that's running through a normal relay, but I'll explain that in a second. The ECU is going to pull in that small relay, you see there. So then the relay goes off, so that's the prime, and then once I start my car, then the relay will run constantly. So by using the printed circuit board type style relay, I'll show the part number this in a moment. This is an Omron relay, it's really cheap. I would use these connections here to pull in a bigger relay, which would be more suitable for running fuel pumps and coils, etc., all that kind of stuff. So when I switch the power off, the relay goes off. The advantage of this, of course, is what I've got here at the minute in here is up in here, I've just got like a standard relay put in. It's one of these guys here, it's this guy over here. The disadvantage of what I've done there at the minute is when I turn on my ignition, I am grounding out that, which means my fuel pump, if you listen to my keys, my fuel pump runs away continuously. You can hear it running away there. Now if you were in a crash, your fuel pump would still stay running, and that wouldn't be a nice thing to happen if it was spewing petrol over the engine bay and you were on fire. So by having the relay the proper way, if the engine was to cut, that relay cuts instantly. Now I'm cutting the engine with the keys here, so my other relay's gone off as well. So what I'll do next now is I'll solder some wires on that. I'll just show a part number. So here's the relay. I thought it was an Omron relay, but it's a Finder. An Omron relay to this looks absolutely identical. So this guy can switch 8 amps. Of course, you're not going to use this to actually switch on the fuel pump. You're going to use it to switch on one of these guys. which is probably capable of 40 or 50 amps. So this guy here is 12 volts DC, and of course it needs a very small amount of current to pull the relay in. So I'm basically going to use this guy to switch this guy to give me my fuel pump, and that'll solve the problem of this guy here being a little on the awkward side. So here's the little relay I spoke of earlier. So the two top pins are plus and minus to drive the coil. So the purple wire here, I've tried to stick with the same colours in the car. This purple wire here will go back to the ECU. This guy here will need some power from the car when the ignition is on. This red wire here is my power that's going to drive the fuel pump, the main fuel pump relay that I have, the larger relay. So this guy can be live all of the time. That's the red and yellow guy there. He can be live all of the time or live when the ignition is on. It doesn't really matter. This relay now is going to use very little power. And the white wire here, then I just picked white because it was the next off the bundle. I cut off the Mark IV loom. And this guy here is going to be switching my fuel pump relay. So the ECU will switch this coil. This in turn will switch the larger relay, which will turn on my fuel pump relay. So this solves the problem for me anyway of getting around the VW fuel pump relay. That's 409. I can't get this guy to work anyway. Got my relay all parcelled up now, and what I did was when I soldered the wires on, I put a bit of heat shrink on them, I wrapped some tape around it and filled it with hot glue and kind of, I'm going to say sculpted into something pretty, but I'll leave that up to yourself to guess. But anyway, so that's that guy there. So I'm going to tuck him in under the dash somewhere. I also put one of these connector blocks in so that I could disconnect it if I had to, or I could also short it out if I ever had any difficulty. If this guy ever failed, I can short the pins here and to run the fuel pump for me. Don't need the relay. So this is just your typical kind of Deutscher type connectors. I like these guys, they're nice and robust, good and strong, easy to take apart. And while I was at it then I just put in an extra fuse. This is a 5 amp fuse, so rather than having the 15 amp fuse coming from the ignition, so rather than having 15 amps powering this guy up, I just have it now, there's a 5 amp, so it's the smallest fuse I have. So if anything goes wrong, 5 amp fuse will blow pretty quickly, I reckon. So I suppose testing is what it's all about. So I'm trying to focus in on this guy here now, but I think you'll hear the fuel pump running anyway. This guy here, get it in focus there. So now when I put on my keys, you'll see. So that's the thing priming. And I crack up right there. That's working neat now. So now if the engine was to cut out for any reason, I mean, I'm going to simulate with the key now, the relay kicks out straight away and stops the fuel pump. So it's a much safer method of running it than wiring it into the ignition. That's what I prefer to do anyhow. In wiring the car, one of the problems you come across is the Mark IV engine has one oil pressure switch, whereas the Mark I Golf has two, and they switch at different points. But from my own experience, it doesn't seem to matter as long as the two of them kind of switch close to each other in time, so that it switches off the oil light. So I do have Mark II set up in my car, so I guess you need to check what way your system works in your own car. If you're copying this, for example, in my Sirocco, one was normally on and one was normally off, and they reversed with oil pressure. But in this case, the clock setup I have in the car is out of a Mark II GTI, and they both are grounded, and the oil pressure opens the switches. So what I've tried to do is try to do a little pictorial view of that. So this is oil B and oil A, and if you put a meter on the switch, the oil pressure switches, you'll find that they both go to ground. So this dot represents the switch. So they both go to ground. So if you put a meter on it, the meter will beep or say that there is a continuity. So on the Mark IV setup, what you have is you have the switch going to ground when the oil pressure is present. So it's the exact opposite of what's on a Mark I. So what I've done here is I've used another one of these relays, and this relay is probably the reason I had this in the first place is for doing this job. So this is a 12-volt relay. It's just a small guy. I've soldered on some connections and I've filled it up with hot glue. Just put a bit of tape around it and try to clean it up afterwards. So it's kind of encapsulated, so the less chance of the wires getting dragged out of it. So what I've done here is kind of drawn how this works. So these 6 dots represent the 6 connections on the relay. There's 6 on this, and there's also 2, a plus and a minus, to drive the coil. So what I've done here is, on this relay there's a normally open and a normally closed. Sorry, normally closed, normally open. And when it switches, it just reverses. So I have put aisle A into 1 and just grounded it, aisle B into 1 and just grounded that through the other pin. So these are independent of each other inside in the relay. So what's going to happen is I'm going to put power to one pin. The Mark IV switch, when it goes good, when the oil pressure is present, is going to ground the current on the other side. So it's going to ground my coil and switch this guy over from normally closed to normally open. And that will trick the clocks into thinking that these 2 switches are present. Now, you only have one switch to lose. If you do lose oil pressure, this guy drops, the relay opens again, these 2 guys switch back. So this will put the light back on your dash again, giving you a warning of low oil pressure. So this works for me. I'm just going to install it now. I have used the same color wires, just fished through the Mark IV loom. Stuff is left over, so for example I'm using brown wire to ground these 2 pins. I've got yellow and blue then, which are the same colours as what's on my car for the 2 oil lights. The red obviously being just red and white there, being ignition. And the green wire here is what goes to the Mark IV oil light switch. So this just makes it a little bit easier if you need to do a bit of fault finding afterwards. It's not necessary or anything, but in my opinion it's something that's worth doing. Okay folks, I'm going for the first start. Okay folks, we have power steering. Nice.